biscuits. Did you f***ing see that? I'm sorry, there may be members in the audience that are under 18 years of age, but if you brought a kid to see that, you can handle some biscuits. My name is Mark Bernardin. I have been coming here. What? Shut up. I'm a comic book writer, I'm a podcaster, but I am also a TV writer, and I was lucky enough to be invited to help write this show that you just saw the friggin' pilot of, which is bananas. These are the people who made the show. Showrunners, Sam Shaw, Dustin Thomason. I'm sorry, young lady, Sissy Spacek. Bill Skarsgard, Melanie Lynskey, and Jane Levy. Okay, so Sam, Dusty, gentlemen.
Hi.
I think this room is pretty familiar in general with the J.J. Abrams aesthetic. You know, we've all watched the TED Talk about a mystery box. How do you mate that with the kind of stories that Stephen King tells?
Hi. Thank you all for being here. There are a lot of human beings in this room. Yeah, as you guys all know, J.J. Abrams, our overlord and our sponsor and boss, he's sort of the poet laureate of mystery box storytelling. And Stephen King doesn't really write mystery box novels, at least as a rule. I mean,
occasionally. Shawshank is kind of a mystery box.
Shawshank is kind of a mystery box story in its way, and basically there's not a subgenre of novel that Stephen King has not written. He's probably written a couple of them since we got up on the stage. So that was sort of an interesting challenge for us in the writer's room, was figuring out how to balance the demands of two kind of different types of storytelling, right? Like you read a book like The Shining, you take a job as a caretaker at a giant, creepy old hotel, and you get told that the last guy who had the job killed his family with an axe. It's like not a good look for your children. You know, like you can anticipate that the story's not going to end well. So we tried to chart a course that in some ways is driven by some mysteries, some of which are presented in this first episode and personified by our friend Bill. And then also to answer some questions perhaps earlier than the audience expects.
Yeah, I mean, right out the gate after this first episode, you start to understand a lot more about who Melanie's character is. You start to see a little bit more about how Bill got down into that tank. And I think that was sort of our homage to King, was to start trying to give answers maybe sooner than people expect.
For Sissy and Melanie and Bill, you've all been in adaptations of actual King novels, Carrie, Rose Red, and It, as well as Castle Rock, which is kind of a King lost work. How have those experiences differed, and how do they kind of feel the same?
Are you asking me that?
I am totally asking you that.
Take it, Bill.
Yeah. No,
I didn't hear what you said.
How
I was
did the
busy reading this
experience...
where it says, please be aware that many members of the audience may be under 18.
Oh dear.
Not anymore. No, I mean, working on something like Carrie, which is based directly on a Stephen King book.
Right.
How does that experience differ from something like Castle Rock, which is in the spirit of Stephen King, but were there any differences or similarities that you noticed?
It didn't, it felt like Stephen King. It felt like we were in that world. I never really even thought about that, because these guys are so good, and the writers in their writer's room, they did such a fabulous job. We were in the Stephen King universe where we belong.
Yeah, no, it's different, because when you adapt a book that's like the book's the source material, and then I think, like, or at least for me with It, like the book became like my Bible, and trying to figure out the character and everything. So it's like, and that book is so strange and weird as well. So you kind of like, you do like an investigation work of like trying to figure out what do you mean, Stephen King? What does this all mean? And I did this exactly the same thing with what you guys wrote. What do you mean, Sam and Dusty? What do you mean by all of this? But it's an original story. It's a brand new story. And so, obviously I approach this material with the scripts being the source material, and trying to figure out the character and the world as well.
Awesome. Melanie?
Well, the other Stephen King thing that I did was written directly for the screen, so I didn't have the same experience of having to stay true to something that was already source material that people loved and felt very connected to. And that was also the freedom with this, I think, is you get to create your own character that doesn't have a lot of expectation. I don't like a lot of expectation, so, so that was good.
Jane and everybody on down, all of you have spent some real time now in the world of Stephen King. Which of his books speak to you the most?
Such an unfair question.
Well, you can cheat. That's fine.
I read Carrie when I was in high school, and I've only had this experience one other time where I had to put it down because I was so scared, which I think is a hard thing to do with a book. And the only other time I've ever had that experience with a book was when I read Helter Skelter. And I was in a hotel room, and I truly thought that Manson was like listening to my thoughts, and I had to put the book down, but he wasn't. I also I've only ever read Carrie. That's the only novel I've read. But I read his memoir/book on writing called On Writing. And I recommend that to any creative person. It's really insightful and fascinating to learn about this prolific artist.
Me?
You?
You're looking at me. I really love Pet Sematary. It's such a creepy idea. It really stayed with me. Because, part of you is like, wouldn't that be amazing? But then, they come back and they're horrible zombies. It's fascinating.
I don't know. I love Misery, and The Body's great. And then obviously It.
Me? Mm-hmm. Carrie, of course.
Does it speak to you now in the same way it spoke to you when you were in Carrie?
Does Carrie speak to me the same way it did when I...
Right, has your view on the book changed as you've progressed?
No. I loved it then, and I love it now, and it's really a part of our culture. Stephen King rings our bell.
It's true. I love The Stand most of all. It's this big, sprawling, weird novel that sort of begins in one place and ends in a totally different place, and has these characters that you'll never forget and that you feel like you know, and it might be the longest book I've ever actually finished, so I might just be bragging here.
You did finish it?
Mostly.
I'm a pretty indecisive creature, so I'm going to say different seasons so that I get, like a 4-pack in a way, a surf and turf. But I feel like, part of the inspiration for this season was the mutual fandom of Shawshank. It's just such a monolithic piece of our culture, and so and the novella's brilliant, and The Body too, and yeah.
So Sissy, Melanie, and Jane, if there is a thread among Stephen King's work, aside from scaring the shit out of people, it's his affection for strong, well-developed female characters. All of his work is sort of shot through with these women that are remarkable and substantial in a genre that often doesn't treat women with that kind of respect. What can you tell me about your characters and how they play into that long-running...
You think he treated Carrie with respect? Did you see the shower scene?
He gave her power.
He did
give her agency.
He did give her power, he did.
But, so tell me a little bit about Ruth Deaver.
What?
Tell me about Ruth Deaver.
Oh, I love Ruth Deaver. What can I tell them about Ruth Deaver? She's from Maine. She's an independent, fabulous woman who was a teacher. She loves her home. She loves her family. She's struggling with a terrible disease. I don't know. You guys wrote it.
Well,
Tell us about Ruth. I was too inside of it to really have an overview. I never stepped outside of her.
One thing that is amazing, I mean, working with all these actors has been sort of a dream come true, and I think in particular, in thinking about Ruth, one thing that we found working with Sissy is that she really taught us about who Ruth was, as even after we had written the first script. You know, that she sort of allowed us to understand more about who the character was, and especially what her connection was to this place. Sissy was actually incredibly instrumental in picking the production design in her own home and thinking through all of those choices in exquisite detail, and we were incredibly grateful for that.
He's giving me more credit than I deserve. The production designer was great.
True, also true.
Melanie, what can you tell us about where Molly Strand is going to go?
Aren't I going to get murdered if I say anything about where?
There's so many witnesses. They can't possibly just rub you out now.
I don't know. They're so powerful. She's a very complicated person. She's stayed in this town that's a very depressed and difficult town and decided to try to sell real estate there, which is just the worst idea. I really feel for her. She's just somebody who's sort of trapped in a cycle of doing the same thing every day, coping in the same way, which isn't very effective, visiting her teenage drug dealer and, making the best of things and thinking that things are going to get better somehow. And that was something that really endeared me to her. And I don't know, she goes on a journey. I don't know what I'm allowed to say. Can Dusty answer for me too?
JJ, what is she allowed to say?
And Jane, we didn't get to see very much of Jackie in the pilot, but tell me about that character and where that story's heading. What you can, so you get murdered.
For sure. I also, I'm thinking about what you just said about how horror genre treats women, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Whether it's mostly exploitative or whether it's empowering. The genre, I mean, that's like a big generalization, but in my experience in horror films, I've felt both ways. But I think it's often actually a genre that celebrates women's strength and women get to be action heroes and step up in the face of danger a lot in horror films that I think is really cool and radical. Horror genre. But also I don't know if you guys saw Don't Breathe. I get tied up from the ceiling and someone comes at me with a turkey baster. I mean, it's complicated. But I play Jackie in Castle Rock, and she's the town taxi driver and the town snoop and the self-proclaimed historian. She is really proud to be from Castle Rock. She's really turned on by the macabre and horror. She's actually you guys. She's she's a fan herself. That's really fun. And I think that this show has really great women roles. And these are two of my favorite actresses, if I could fangirl over you guys. And it's so cool to work with these women. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the final girl is a real thing, and there's a reason why that is a trope. And sometimes that you can play into that trope really well and really powerfully, and then sometimes, again, we've seen this before, and it doesn't quite work. But horror has that expansiveness.
Yeah. I mean, Ellen Burstyn in The Exorcist, one of my favorite performances and roles. I could go on and on. Carrie.
Sam and Dusty, what did you guys discover about King's work in the process of making this? What did you guys unearth that you didn't quite know going into it?
I think when you sort of do a great Stephen King reread, I'm sure a lot of you guys read some of the books when you were younger, and it's interesting to kind of go back and look at the books anew when you get a little older, and you start to see some things for example, often you'll start in a Stephen King story and it seems like it's kind of one genre, and then you'll end up in a totally different genre by the end of the book. And that's a really, I think, fascinating thing. As you look at, I was talking about The Stand, I mean, that's sort of the quintessential example where you start with this, book about an outbreak and a bunch of people who are trying to survive in the aftermath, and you end up in this kind of epic battle of darkness and light that puts Randall Flagg on a mountain by the end of it, and no spoilers, sorry. And so I think it's that sense of the unexpected that really came back to both of us, that we wanted to try to make this season into that, to try to sort of start you in one place and then take you to a very strange and unexpected place by the end.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say, too, he's a writer who returns to the scene of the crime. Like literally in the case of Castle Rock, he's been raining disasters down in this town for 40 years or whatever it's been, to the extent that you wonder who the still lives in this town, in 2018, which was an interesting question to us. But there are these motifs and ideas and images and relationships, whether it's, he loves prisons and crime and punishment and death row, loves stories about how the traumas of childhood inform the trajectory of an adult life. So part of the
clowns
and clowns, by the way, who doesn't love a clown? So part of what was interesting about the writing process was that we sort of we spent a lot of time in the writers' room just in a sort of analytical mode, trying to figure out precisely what it is that makes a Stephen King story to sort of reverse engineer our own.
You remember, Mark, you were there for some.
I vaguely remember. I mean, I was drunk for most of it. So what does make a Stephen King story a Stephen King story? Give me the sauce, man.
Bill, do you know?
No.
You put Bill Skarsgard in it, apparently, these days.
He really combines horror with humor. I think you did that with Castle Rock, you guys.
How many
It's
times
hilarious.
did you laugh?
That first episode.
In the first episode.
Yeah, I mean, I think, too, that what you're getting at, though, is character is really at the heart of it. And I think in all of the books, that's really what he invented, in a way. He invented character horror. He really brought to it a totally new genre.
One last question, because we have to leave, sadly, because we could do this all day. But for the cast, if you could be in any other Stephen King adaptation, which would you want to be in? Except, Bill, come on, you're just cornering the market. Pick a book. Pick a character you want to play. Who wants to be Jack Torrance?
Me. That would be awesome.
Melanie?
I mean, so many of the great ones have been done already, and they've been so iconic. I was doing an interview earlier today, and someone was like, what if there was an Annie Wilkes origin story? And I was like, yes. Because, you would never remake that because it's perfection. It's one of the greatest performances of all time. But I was like, I would be so there for that. And then I asked her to write it. So hopefully, we'll see.
Yeah, I'd like to see Jane as Jack.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Sissy, what about you?
I have no idea. I want to be in his next one. Coming right up.
Whatever's coming.
Whatever's coming.
Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our Castle Rock panel. But hold on. Keep it. They're giving these things away in the giveaway thing, so take whatever ticket they gave you and go to wherever they give it away, and you can get one of these. And there will be a signing tomorrow somewhere where Bill might be looking to sign a thing or two, as will Dusty, who is as famous and lovely as Bill is. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for this amazing cast.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Be sure to click to the right to check out another awesome Comic-Con video, and don't forget to subscribe.